Welcome to the Sports Ethicist Show, coming to you from the basement of Burpee on the campus of Rockford University in Sportstown, USA, Rockford, Illinois. I am Shawn Klein, the Sports Ethicist. The Sports Ethicist Show discusses the many ethical and philosophical issues that arise in and around sport. You can read the Sports Ethicist blog at sportsethicist.com, where you can also download podcasts of previous shows, subscribe to the podcast, or find links to related information. The Sports Ethicist is also on Facebook and Twitter. You can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. The focus of today's show is on the conceptual relationship between work and play. I recently gave a talk on work and play at the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport conference held at California State University-Fullerton. And on the same panel with me was Bobby Fernandez, who gave a talk on, wait for it, work and play. So I spoke with Bobby after the panel, and we thought it would be fun to do a show focusing on these important concepts of work and play. Bobby Fernandez aspires to be a lifelong mover. He's been curious about how the body moves since his early days of t-ball. This fascination has driven him through a successful college football career and into his current pursuit of a PhD in kinesiology. He's completing a master's thesis at California State University-Fullerton on the subject of self-efficacy in physical activity. Bobby has a passion for health and wellness. He currently has over 10 years' experience in the healthcare industry and blogs about all things having to do with human performance at movingforwellness.com. His blogs serve as both informational outlets as well as philosophical forums on sports, ethics, psychology, and wellness of mind, body, and spirit. Hi, Bobby. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Shawn. Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned in the intro that we both gave talks at the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport that was at your institution, the California State University at Fullerton. And the title of your talk was Playing with Schrodinger's Cat, Discerning Work from Play in Professional Settings. So you somehow managed to work in quantum physics into a conference on sports and play. That's very creative.
Yeah, that was my own little personal endeavor, I think.
Well, it made it interesting and fun, that's for sure. But I wanted to start the show today with maybe you giving a quick rundown of the thesis in your paper, in your presentation. I've read it. I was at the presentation, but most of our listeners, all 5 of them or so, probably haven't. So I was hoping to maybe just give us a quick summary, a quick précis of what the paper's about. Okay,
sounds good. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but you presented right before mine. So I'm thankful that you sent me your paper afterwards so I can read it in much more detail because, as you could imagine, it was my first presentation to an international audience. I was a bit, up in my head, so to speak, when listening to yours. So I really appreciated yours, reading it after the fact.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when we sat down and we looked at each other's titles of each other's talks. I think both got a little nervous. God, I hope we don't say the same thing.
yeah, step all over each other. But no, it worked out. It was very synergistic. So, as far as mine, the sort of genus for tying the two, the quantum mechanics and the play work dichotomy together for me was from a book I had read called The Dancing Wu Li Masters, and I read it during undergrad at the suggestion of my sport philosophy professor.
The Dancing, what's the name of the book again?
It's called The Dancing Wu Li Masters.
Wu Li?
It's Wu Li. It's a Chinese term, W-U-Li.
All right.
And it's a great book. I definitely put it in the show notes, and I highly recommend it. The main reason for the author creating it is that Robert Zukov, became enthralled with the entire field of quantum mechanics and the new physics. He wrote, I believe, in the 70s, or at least conceptualized it in the 70s. It was at a time when this sort of new aginess was coming about, and people were trying to relate, all of life really with some sort of metaphysical or spiritual kind of model. So, anyways, it's written for the layperson. You don't have to know a lick of math beyond elementary or high school in order to get it, get some of the concepts. But and it was really it stuck with me. Obviously, it's always been in the back of my mind as far as relating these philosophical theses to something more physical. So that's sort of where I was coming from in the paper, and the problem, the question that I was trying to answer is one that your paper addresses, this sort of work and play dichotomy. When one's at work, one cannot be at play, and vice versa. So the reason I thought about brought me to quantum mechanics is an experiment called Schrodinger's cat. And if you're not familiar with it, it's simply a thought experiment that was conducted or created in I believe, the 1920s or.
Sounds about right.
Time.
Yeah, it was about.
Yeah. It's just at the time when sort of the whole scientific world was trying to get used to the new discoveries that came about with subatomic material and all these sort of quantum mechanic findings that they were trying to play with.
1930. So anyways, the date actually is 1935.
1935. Okay,
is when that came out.
Right, and this conversation, this debate within the field of, amongst the world's physicists, Einstein was one of them. This debate went on for decades, so it wasn't anything that they took lightly or that they sort of agreed upon quickly. And so, anyways, the experiment sort of goes that there's a cat, and the problem they were trying to figure out or grasp was that subatomic particles that they were now able to measure. They were not, in their experiments, such as light, like a photon. In their experiments, they weren't able to accurately pinpoint both the position of the light particle and the momentum. So if you think about the macroscopic world, if you throw a ball up in the air, at any point in time, you can accurately say that there's where the ball is, and that's how fast it's moving, with its mass and velocity to get the momentum.
Right.
So you can accurately predict where it will end up, when it lands.
Which is important when you're fighting a war.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can't do this. And with the subatomic particles, it was ambiguous. They would make the prediction, and then lo and behold, it'd end up somewhere else. They'd do it again, the exact same conditions. Lo and behold, yet another place. And the possibilities seemed infinite. So they couldn't really predict their future as they were able to in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the cat experiment does is it offers a scenario in which you put a cat into a box and you rig up this whole kind of like Rube Goldberg kind of scenario where if this happens, then a vial of poison breaks and released into the box and the cat dies, obviously from inhalation. Or if nothing happens, the cat's life is preserved because the vial didn't break.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're saying is that until we open that box, you leave the cat in there for about an hour or so. It's that time. Until you open that box, you don't know if the cat's dead or alive. And so that's what I wanted to sort of offer with elite sports and professional sports. Until you sort of open that box, they could be at work or play, or as you brought up, any mixture of the two. So that's pretty much the summary.
Okay. Yeah. So what's partially interesting. Well, there's a lot of interesting things about the paper, but one question that I had, and I think also came up in the discussion, the role of the quantum mechanics of Schrodinger's cat thought experiment in your paper. Do you see it more as an analogy, as a tool to try to understand the relation between the concept of work and play, or concepts of work and play? Or do you see there being a deeper metaphysical claim involved by bringing in Schrodinger's cat here?
Right. That was, I think, one of the criticisms that came up in the discussion, and it's something I've thought a lot about. And I didn't make it entirely clear, I don't think, that it's not to serve as sort of a model or to say, hey, this is true in physics, so we should apply the same thing or something very similar to the question of work and play, right, in our philosophical discussion. It was just sort of to say that this is how those physicists, those hardcore scientists, dealt with ambiguity in their field, and they had to sort of rethink pretty much everything that they came to know, they came to believe. And so much like with your paper and others that have questioned this whole premise of autotelicity, whether or not that is sufficient necessary for characteristic for play. So maybe we need to question something like that, and my sort of scenario or my offering is just to say that, to give credibility to that. Say, hey, look, it worked in this field in the beginning of the 20th century. They were able to move on from that with accepting this idea of ambiguity. Maybe we can do the same.
Okay, so it is meant more as a kind of metaphor, as an analogy to say, look, here's a way to understand this ambiguity in our usage and our understanding of concepts like work and play and their relationship, because there is a kind of, to borrow another term, an entanglement between these two, and it's often hard to know. That was one of the things I like. I don't think you got into it in the presentation as much, but the idea that the performer, the athlete per se, is different than the observer, and oftentimes it's the observer who's trying to make the determination. Philosophers of sport or psychologists and or other commentaries who are trying to figure out, well, is this work or is this play? Often the athlete is just moving, is just doing what they're doing. They're not necessarily thinking, well, am I working? Am I playing? And so it's more the observer that's trying to make the determination about it. And so that's part of where this is more a question, is how do we know? How do we know if it's work or play, particularly if it involves people's inner motivations and inner goals that aren't, that they don't necessarily wear on their sleeves, so they don't have a sign around their neck saying, I am now doing this as an end in itself. It'd be a lot easier if people walked around with those, because then we could figure that out.
Yeah, some sort of meter or a color code system.
Right. Oh, he's wearing blue today. Okay, so he's engaged in an activity for purely the activity's sake. He's wearing red. No, it's just instrumental.
It's strictly business. Yeah.
And so I like that in the paper you talked about that as a parallel to, again, another kind of parallel or analogy to quantum mechanics, that that oftentimes, depending on the interpretation of the data of quantum mechanics, what your theory is, whether the cat's dead or alive, some understandings of it or interpretations want to say, more that it's not merely an epistemological issue, that we just don't know whether the cat's dead or alive. The cat is both dead and alive, right? So that's one way to take Schrodinger's experiment, which is, I think that's partly the way Schrodinger himself meant it.
Right.
But other people have looked at it and said, well, the cat is in one or the other state. We just don't know, and we can't know. Because there's also an element there. If you open the box, it triggers the process as well, right? Isn't that part
of
it?
The influence of the observer upon the experiment or upon the system.
Yeah, so that would changes the state possibly, and so you don't know when the box is closed. You just can't know. It's a literal black box. So there are two interpretations there. One where it's more epistemological, where we just, we don't have the epistemic ability to know, and others translate that or take that a little bit further, let's say, to more of a metaphysical claim that there's actually two states there that collapse when you open the box.
Right.
And I mean that you we don't have to get into which interpretation is correct, because that's far out of my league.
Right. Yeah. That's a discussion for in a paper for much longer time frame.
Yeah,
well, I did consider that, as far as the two realities collapsing, and as you mentioned, the other interpretation of Schrodinger's cat. But it's just all too vast to explore. Yeah, and the point, and that's partly why I asked. Well, is this more of a framing issue for your paper, or an analogy for the paper, rather than making a real metaphysical point about the state of the athlete, whether they're in a state of work or play. If you were making the more metaphysical claim, I think it would be beholden upon you to get into the interpretations of quantum mechanics and how it applies here and how it's relevant. But since that's not really your point, you don't need to do that, and it would be a waste of
most people's time, which I guess would be kind of play, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's kind of it's good you brought up that whole observer effect, because when I was, and I didn't write this down at all, but just in thinking about it, when the metrics with which we establish work or play, okay, most of the time it's traditionally it's been sort of this monetary gain, or if it's productive. So it's very, very largely in the material realm. And I think the things that we were talking about as far as the intrinsic factors and even asking someone, what I was going to say is even asking someone, as I suggested, after the fact, hey, were you at work or play during that game? That's going to impact their response. Then they have to cognitively assess, okay, what was I doing? Was I enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it, or was I thinking about this? So you're right to mention that maybe we can't even figure out, regardless of what metric we use, maybe it's just not knowable.
Yeah, I that was a thought I had as well, was that even the athlete, because that was one of the questions I had as I'm reading your paper, you what is the equivalent of opening the box for the athlete? And, you talked about the assessment of the experience by the athlete, interviewing them, talking to them, but then they become an observer of their own experience,
right.
and that's going to color it, right? What are their if they have preconceived notions about work and play, that's going to color whether or not they say they are at work or play. Going back and introspectively thinking about it is going to be different than the lived experience itself. And so it's a hard thing probably to try to pull out in the moment too, because they're busy doing what they're doing. So it's hard to know that. So it may not be knowable. Now, whether it's not ultimately knowable or is just an epistemic thing, again, that goes back to other questions that we can't really get into, but it's parallel to the interpretations of quantum mechanics. What extent is this metaphysic or an epistemic issue? But yeah, I think it's probably hard for the athlete himself or herself to know, particularly because unless they're really intellectual or have thought about this previously, they're not going to have the cognitive apparatus to really think about it, because they're just going to go with sort of ordinary conceptions, right? So if they have a conception of work, well, I was getting paid, so I was working, or well, I was having fun, so it's play. That's not going to, as students of philosophy of sport and intellectual engagement of sport, it's clear to us that we need more than just that, right? Because if it's merely just, well, when you're getting paid, you're working, that seems to not to really cover or really capture what our lived experiences are like, because it does seem like, at least to me, maybe this gets a little bit into what my paper was about, that one can be at work and also be playing to some degree, depending on how you conceptualize that. Now, I think if you go with some of the standard accounts like Heisinger and Calais and Suits, they all seem to agree that play in some fundamental sense can't be work, can't be productive in any way. And so my assertion there that, well, one could be work and playing, they would say is contradictory, or I'm confused, or I'm talking about very different concepts. And when you were in your paper, it does seem that you at least not necessarily that you endorse this mutually exclusivity of work and play, but you're responding to it in a way that you're saying, okay, well, this is what the standard theories hold, and so you're responding to that. So, but I am curious, what do you think that these concepts are or have to be mutually exclusive, or can it be that you can be working while playing?
Well, I think that was one of the vulnerabilities I had in going with, drawing the analogy to quantum mechanics, is that in mechanics, in science, there is a dichotomy. It's either, it's particles either here or there.
Right. The cat's either dead or alive.
Right. The cat's either dead or alive. And so I guess maybe willfully didn't go down that road to make an assertion one way or the other, because then I'd have to rethink the whole quantum mechanics thing. But after the fact, I mean, it wouldn't be out of the question to assume that there are. See, I wanted to avoid a third possibility. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to say that the combination of work and play is a third entity unto itself, then I'd have to sort of defend my own position and say, well, no, I reject that. But if you say there are two possibilities, but maybe they can exist in sort of a mixed ratio, of one another, then I guess I'd have an easier time sort of making sense of it all.
Yeah, and I mean, I still have work to do on making sense of my thesis as well. And because what do I really mean when I assert or try to argue that people can be playing and working at the same time? Is it that there's a third? Well, it wouldn't be an entity per se, but
just like a discrete categorization.
Yeah, is its own category. So there's working, that's just work, like your example of the guy selling peanuts at the ballpark. He's just working. He's not playing at all. He's just working, walking up and down, selling peanuts. And then the guys on the field. Well, that's maybe not a great example on my part there, because they may be working, they may be playing. But let's imagine that it's an amateur league. Then they're playing on most accounts of play, and then there is this question of the professional athletes, and are they a third thing, or is it just an admixture of, okay, well, there's some work going on and there's some playing going on, and it's just the balance of that. And I'm not sure where I stand on that quite yet. I mean, and one of the questions there is there really a difference between those two claims? So that's something that I still need to think about. I do think I lean a little bit towards saying that it, in some degree, is. Oh, see, I don't know. Yeah, I try to put it one way or the other, and I kind of when I put it as an admixture, I start to think, no, I really think there's something unique about this experience. But then I'm like, yeah, but it really is a mix as well. I mean, what I don't want to be committed to, the way that a lot of the classic accounts of play seem to be committed to the claim that play has to be wholly unproductive. Now, whether you want to say, well, look, there's work in the ordinary sense of this is what you do to get paid, and it's purely instrumental. That does seem to be distinct necessarily from play. And then there's play that is done that is, we might say pure play or just sheer enjoyment, where money or other external goods or anything beyond the activity itself is a part of one's conception or goal or the activity at all. I mean, I do see that those categories exist, and so I don't take my point to be negating those kinds of claims. But I do think that there's and I actually think more of the cases that we see that there is more of a mixture, I guess, and now I'm more leaning towards that end, where people are playing, but there is a productive aspect to it, and that can even be a material productive aspect of it, or a monetary productive aspect of it. And then people can be working, and it can have a lot of the characteristics that we normally attribute to play. It can be freely engaged in, voluntarily chosen, people getting an internal satisfaction from what it is that they do. I think of the phrase, and I actually use this in my presentation, that the phrase, the common thing that teachers, you often hear from teachers, right? I'm paid to grade, but I'll teach for free. Although I don't want my administrators to hear that.
Or any aspiring PhDs like myself.
Right. Well, no, you should hear it.
It's true.
But right, because there's an aspect of teaching as internally satisfying. It's a I don't know how much in your program you've had an opportunity to teach, but it's it's something that I love doing. I just when I'm in, I have that sense of flow. That I can never say his name. Csikszentmihalyi, I think is the way you say it.
Yeah.
Talks about in terms of a lot of people's work and their activities, and athletes, they often have this experience of just being absorbed in the activity where normal sort of time sense disappears. I mean, an hour and a half class for me just blows by. My students are staring at the clock, and it's ticking slowly, tick, tick, tick. But for me, it's like, what? Class is over already? And so there's just that sense of outside the normal context. So it has that sort of its own time and space for the way that a lot of the play theorists talk about. They have the playground, you have the separateness of space and time, right? And you have a classroom. There's a room set aside for teaching, and it has its own tools. So it has its own setup, right? And work is like that too. You have your workspace. You have whether it's a cubicle or
work clothes. You have your uniform. For play. It's all very discreet.
So I think that go ahead.
I think we purposely do that, right? Because the distinction is so hard to make. So we need these sort of external cues to remind ourselves.
So you mean like I have my work shirt, and then I come home and I change into something different, and that puts me out of my frame of mind of, okay, I'm not working now. Now I can relax. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could still be on the phone, with maybe a student or a something job related, and you get home and you kick off your shoes and you're thinking, okay, well, it's not so bad. I'm kind of at play. Like right now, I was at work 30 minutes ago, but now I'm kicking back. I'm in reclined position. I'm at play now. It's been half an hour, but it seems like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah, and so that was another thing that I didn't develop as much in my talk that I wanted to, which is that not so much that work and play are the same thing, because I think that would be a mistake. There are two different categories of human activity that are important to distinguish and identify, that we can put under the headings of work and play, even if it's not always clear where those boundary lines are. I think there are two kinds of activities there. So part of my paper was to say, well, that there is a mixing of these that we have to pay attention to. But another part of that I want to develop is that there are important parallels between work and play that we ought to pay attention to, even if they're not the same thing. And so this kind of parallels your paper, right? Because it's not that you're trying to say that there's a Schrodinger's cat in sport or in play, but that we can learn by looking at what physicists did with ambiguity to what philosophers of sport ought to do with their ambiguity.
Right.
Is to notice these parallels and pay attention to that. And so I think one of the things that people admire about play and want to praise play for, and say, look, we need to pay attention to play, we need to engage in play more, right? That it's good for us, or that in an intrinsic way. It is the autotelic aspect of it. It is an end in itself. It's something that you get joy out of. It's something that makes you feel in the world in that sort of I guess a kind of Heideggerian sense or existentialist sense of being in the world, of feeling your existence, and meeting the challenges of the world. That's part of what I think we love about play. Right. And I think we also see that, or parallel things at least in work, right? That although oftentimes, and for many people, it is more instrumental where you're just working for the paycheck, that there is a way of looking at work as internally satisfying, that even if it's not your dream job or the job you've always wanted and love, in every way possible, there's still things in the job that you can look at and enjoy and say, okay, well, I did a good job at this, and or I'm gonna give my all to this part of the job, because this will be worthwhile to do a job well done, even if it's a mundane thing. But also even with people who have that job that they do love, that it is more clearly for them something that they're engaging in as an end in itself, and the money is important too. The other kinds of external goods that would come to that, the recognition, the pride that one might feel in terms of public recognition for job well done, whether it's from your superiors or your peers and so on. That internally you do that, which I think is captured by that phrase. I get paid to grade. I teach for free, is because the teaching part is the part that teachers love. That's right. Where they get that internal satisfaction. The grading, not so much, right? That's the sort of I'd like to say sometimes every job has the taking out the trash or cleaning the dirt traps part of the job. I mean, no matter how much you love your job, there's something about it that you don't want to do.
Right. There are aspects you're averse to.
Yeah. Go ahead. I
think the internalized, the sort of benefit, that's a good place that play philosophers should go. It's in a paper by Stephen Schmid. Are you familiar with it? It's Beyond Autotelicity.
Okay. I'm familiar with Stephen's work, but that particular paper is on my kind of to read list. But so I'll definitely bump that up. So Stephen,
right? Schmid, yeah, he argues that in a certain way, play can be an empirical thing that we can discover through identifying and measuring intrinsic motivating factors. So the thing you said about work and play kind of having similarities, the whole reason I think I came to be interested in studying play, my main background is sports psychology, and wanted to eventually find ways and reasons for people to move, to want to move and exercise motivation, all that sort of thing. Intrinsic motivation is a big part of that.
Yeah. And
so, like you say, maybe advocating play for the sake of physical activity, which we see a lot of in with all our Get Moving and all the public programs and health promotion initiatives. That sort of thing is where we can find, we can sort of cultivate the intrinsic values. We can measure them, and the play and work are mixed there in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Because you can sometimes get. Do you have children?
I do.
Yeah.
I have. Yeah, I have a story about my daughter that I'll tell you after you make your point.
Well, I was maybe this is related to also what your story you're telling. I look forward to that. So, because I have one son, and there is, when you want your kid to do something, you're trying to get them to do something. Oftentimes, certainly when they're 3-4 years old, it's mostly about external rewards: a lollipop, a cookie, some ice cream, staying up late, whatever. Having that extra episode of Clifford or something. Those are the things that we can buy my son with. And but you hope as they get older that they experience and can internalize the things that you want, that you want them to do. So if it's staying healthy, staying physically active, you don't want, or at least the way I want my son to be active and healthy, and I don't want it to always be that it's something outside the activity itself that he's doing it for, right? Or always having to think. Keeping the eyes on the prize. Okay, well, I got to go to the gym today, or I got to work out, I got to ride the bike, or whatever it is that he might be doing. Just because, because I need to get my 30 minutes of cardio in every day, or whatever. Because you're not going to do that, right? I mean, I'm sure you experience that in
we
your
know.
work.
I mean, once life kicks in, those things don't sustain as driving forces.
Right. I mean, because the minute something else comes up, and the minute you want to sleep in because you're not feeling well, you're a little sick, or you got a lot of work to do, you have a show to prepare for. These were the things I was thinking about this morning, but I made sure I got up to go. And now some of that is external. I mean, one thing that I think sometimes we take too far is polarizing the distinction between internal and external motivations, and to some degree demeaning the external motivations, because I do think that those are are equally as powerful.
Right.
Maybe not equally as powerful, but they are powerful, and they can be important, certainly for the short term. For things that you really want someone, I think, to adopt over a long term, if they don't internalize it, I just don't see it as being effective. But oftentimes, remembering the external value or the external motivator, that's why we have that. Keep your eyes on the prize, right? Is to get you going.
What we learn in the psychological literature is that external factors are they're both valued, but external are great for inciting a behavior or initiating a behavior.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, you have to sort of come back in on the back end with the intrinsic factors to sustain the behavior. So they're at least in the psychological literature, they're both valued.
Yeah. No, and that's good. And I think typically there is at least in the philosophic literature, the ethical literature, a lip service paid to the balance or to the equal validity of them. But philosophers dating back to Plato seem to have an obsession with things that are purely internal and purely ends in themselves, and anything that might stink of instrumentality, they get suspicious of. And I think that's some of the background motivation for my paper and some other papers that I've done is trying to unearth that and trying to bring that to light, that there are important things that are external to activities, to play, to work, to any of our activities that can be important parts of it. But ultimately, I think for you to derive the full appreciation of a particular activity or of life itself, you have to internalize the motivator. And I think that's because a lot of the activities, the payoff, let's say, the intrinsic joy that you get, I think, is going to come. And we see this in the play theorist, right? The idea that it is freely chosen, that it's a voluntarily engaged in activity, is a key part to what makes play so important for lots of reasons. The acceptance of the rules, but also I think just the buy-in. And I think that's a good lesson to not just for play, but for work and for all other areas of our lives, that remembering the fact that we're choosing to engage in these activities, except when we're not, but then that's a different, if we're under coercion, that's a different kind of situation. But for the most part, we're not, at least in our society, that you can choose the kind of work you can, among a limited number of options, right? You can't just decide to be a pro basketball player if you're 5'6". You can't decide to be, a brain surgeon when you're 40 years old and haven't graduated from college yet, right? I mean, it's just not, not going to happen. But within a delimited number of options, you do choose what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I think remembering the fact that you're choosing it empowers you and internalizes what might be an external thing, can help to internalize it. And one philosopher, David Kelly, has an interesting paper, and I'll put a link up for that, called it's not really a paper, it's more of an article called "I Don't Have to," and it's talking about taking on things that you do in your life, remembering the fact that you've chosen them, turning them into "I want to" rather than "I have to." And so it's more almost psychological or motivational, like remembering that you're choosing to do this, right? Even if it's not necessarily something that you want to do, right? In and of itself, like you talk about the aversion, you don't want to take out the trash as part of your job, but that's part of your job. You've chosen this job. And so this is some of the things that are part of what you've chosen, and remembering that and calling that back into your awareness. Okay, yeah, this is part of the activity that I've chosen to engage in for the ends of this activity. And so even though this particular thing I don't really like, I've still chosen it. And so you take ownership of it. And I think it helps you to get more out of even the mundane things in life. So it's, I talk to my students sometimes about this when they complain about, I don't want to go to class. And it's like, well, you want to get a college degree, right? That's why you're here. Yeah. It's like, well, so you've chosen this path, and then you've chosen this particular major and this particular degree path, and that this class is part of that. And so when you connect it back into the choices you've made, the person, I think, can often take a lot more ownership of it and get a lot more satisfaction out of it. It becomes more, they recognize that their activities are self-directed, so it empowers them either to not engage in the activity anymore if it's really not something they want to do, or they recognize, no, I did choose this, and so it is mine, and they can get a lot more out of it in the way that you get a lot out of play because you've chosen to do it.
Right. Now I have two stories about my daughters, but
oh right, yeah. Let's hear these stories.
So
you have two daughters.
I have two daughters. And I have a son as well.
Okay.
So I married my wife. She had two children from her previous marriage. So the two older, my son's 13, and my daughter is 10.
Okay.
And then my youngest daughter, the one my wife and I have together, is about to be a year in just a few days.
Oh, great.
So yeah, I've got a big range and a large data set to pull from when I observe them, of their behaviors, their development, and everything. But the first thing I wanted to say is that I was thinking about this. The idea of autotelicity, and in your paper, I think you said you can't think of a purely autotelic activity, meaning that something is done strictly for its own sake.
Right.
And what got me thinking is watching my 1-year-old, explore her world through everything
right.
that is new to her. She may, she splashes in her bath with the water now because it's fun, and she does these things. And she has like 3 or 4 different things that she knows will bring her joy and put a smile on her face.
Uh-huh.
She now has knowledge that that's play and fun to her, but she didn't when the first time she decided to splash the water. She didn't know what it would do.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that first act was autotelic, but now it's sort of a feedback loop
mm-hmm.
of reward, of intrinsic enjoyment that motivates her behavior, that sustains her behavior. And so I think that kind of goes with what you're saying as far as getting through the mundane and tying work and play,
right.
For the sake of continuing a desired behavior or habit.
And I don't think it undermines the joy or the beauty of that activity that she's engaging in. In fact, I think it enhances it. At one, she's not really conceptualizing it, but to recognize, hey, this gives me joy, and then to be able to do it and bring that on in ways of your own choosing, I think is more powerful than if you just didn't have that opportunity.
Right. The second story about my other daughter is just this morning. You said your son is about 7?
4.
4, okay. So he doesn't have these sort of online, like Blackboard type online programs at school yet, I'm sure.
No, and he goes to Montessori, and they have some computers, but not a lot. But although he's quite proficient at my iPad, and probably, and I think he's better at using those technologies than his grandmother, at least. And he taught himself how to use it. I mean, it was amazing to watch him do that with the iPad. Just trial and error experimenting,
right.
which got me
through play, and then maybe he found something he likes, and now he kind of, he does it purposefully.
Yep.
But with my daughter, she's in 5th grade, and so she's getting into this program called Edmodo, which is just like a Blackboard type thing, or online homework is there, but they also have a sort of, they want to make it look like Facebook as much as possible, so they have sort of a social interface, and you can go on. She wanted to log on this morning as I was leaving the house, and my wife and I were careful that she doesn't just go on just to gossip or to waste time. So I asked her, what are you doing? She goes, I'm going on Edmodo. I said, okay, are you doing homework, or is it for fun? And she said, it's for homework. And I said, okay, so what are you going to do? I kind of got thinking, I'm going to have this talk on play today. let me use this as a teaching moment for her. And so I kind of got her. I drew it out of her, like try and discover, what are you doing? Is it for fun? Okay, it's for fun. Why do you say it's for fun? Do you have any assignments to check on? Is there a sort of imperative? Is there something that you need to see on the website, or is it just your own enjoyment? So it was kind of neat just to have her, verbalize what I was thinking about back to me in her childlike terms. So that was it, just an anecdote aside.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty interesting because and it's interesting that the way you phrase the question, right? Is this just for fun, or is it for homework? Of course, that begs the question of, do those have to be different, right? I mean, there's the assumption there that homework can't be fun, and my experience, it usually wasn't, but in and fun things were usually things that didn't have to do with school. But my son, at least at 4, and at the level he's at, I don't think he'd understand the question. Well, is this school, or is this for fun? And Montessori does that on purpose, and that I don't know how familiar you are with Montessori. Educational philosophy, but I mean, right? They call their stuff. The kids are engaged in works, right? So I mean, they go in, they do works. My son, I learned a new work today, but they're also games in a lot of ways too. What they're doing, so there isn't a clear distinction, quite intentionally, between work and play. And Montessori famously said that play is the work of the child. But then even when I work with the middle schoolers at the school, and this year, we're so these are our middle schoolers. They're 7th and 8th graders, and we're reading Plato's Republic this semester with them. And so we had our first session a couple weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about the first part of Book 1 of Plato's Republic, and afterwards, they were kind of buzzing, and they were like, yeah, that was fun. So I mean, it was work. It was schoolwork. We were engaged in an intellectual inquiry, but it was fun at the same time, and it was enjoyable, and it was pursued, in a way for its own sake, but also for the sake of education and for learning about the world. And so I don't think there's normally a reason to pull those apart into really sharply distinct elements between, well, this is just purely instrumental, or this is an end in itself. Although I think those categories do exist, I think most things are the sort of Aristotelian idea of the constitutive goods, that they're mixes, that they're things that we pursue as ends in themselves, but they're also means to further ends, and those ends are also ends, but that there also can be part of or means to other ends. And so, like you mentioned in my talk, I sort of challenged the idea of autotelicity, at least in specific particular human activities. I do think that there is a pure end in itself, but I think it's human life itself, that our lives themselves are the only thing that are really pursued purely as an end in itself. Everything else has some other end, I think, that it's connected to. And ultimately to our lives itself. That why is it that the pleasure of play, or the pleasure of work, or the importance of health and wellness and all that, those all are ends in themselves to pursue, but they're also ends that are part of a life well lived. And so I think that's that kind of mixing, that admixing, right, of those constitutive of goods, I think are sometimes get lost in the shuffle when we talk about these things, because it seems like we often want to put things in a category of instrumental or end in itself, but most things don't seem to fit. At least that's my thought on that. And that
right.
And that kind of connects to your idea of the sort of superposition that we often I just kicked my knee. We often don't know whether we're working or playing, and part of that, and so this sort of the superposition that until we figure that out, then we're kind of doing both, or we just don't know. And part of that is maybe it's the wrong question to be asking. I think with the cat, that is the question to ask: is the cat dead or alive? But I think when in our other activities, whether it's work or play, I'm not sure how important it is to really get a clear answer to that.
Right.
Are we engaging in the activity voluntarily? That's important, certainly, from a political and moral perspective.
Right, from a human rights kind of standpoint.
Go ahead.
I think you're right in saying that it shouldn't really matter. The only caveat I'd offer is that I read a book a couple years ago called Drive by Daniel Pink. It's very popular, New York Times bestseller. But is a lot of what he says goes off of another psychological principle, self-determination theory. And one of the warnings he offers to it's mainly written for the business executive, as far as how to motivate employees and offer incentives and so forth. One of the things he warns against is when work and play sort of mix in the wrong way, they have a tendency to extinguish or discourage the desired behavior. And so this is one of the questions I've been wrestling with, and again, one of the reasons for exploring play and work is that we have physical activity as a desired behavior, but I think the way we're going about it on a macroscopic level a lot of times extinguishes that whatever intrinsic factors that are present or have been present. Like you mentioned earlier, you want your kids to be active and live healthfully, but you don't want them to just do it for that sake well into their adulthood. So I'd like to say, yeah, let's not worry about it, whether someone's at work or play, but when informing our policies and designing our programs and initiatives, let's try and focus a little bit more on, or be aware of at least, that if not handled properly, work can infect play. Something can't be too much work, can't be too much play either, because there has to be a purpose. Otherwise, we're wasting our money. So that's the sort of where I diverge from that.
Okay.
That statement of let's not worry about it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. My answer to that might be, it's not so much whether it's work or play per se, but whether it's the thing that's motivating you. What is it that you're trying to do? Is it productive? Does it have a purpose? Is it voluntarily engaged in? Is it something that the person sees as an important part of their life, or something that they see as secondary or tertiary, or just more accidental? And I think thinking about it in those, we often use, I think, work and play as stand-ins for that, and work being the thing. Okay, that's external. It's something that's instrumental. Maybe even it's not the most important thing. Play is what's more important, and it's internal, and it's an end in itself. And that's where I think there's conceptual confusion, because there's a lot of things in work and play that have things from the other columns. And what I think you're talking about, and maybe is that we need to pay attention to the things in the columns themselves, right? What's motivating? Is it internal? Is it external? We want to try to internalize it. Is it voluntarily engaged in? Is it something that they see the purpose of it and can connect to the purpose in a more direct and personal way? That those seem to be the important things to pay attention to. And so if you're always trying to get your employees to be more productive just by trying to throw certain kinds of external things at them, parking spot, or raise, or promotion, those there's a lot of literature that those tend to run out in the long run if they aren't matched or also built up with the other things. I think is that partly what you were talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
They sort of extinguish the internal vigor or fire for doing whatever it is you want them to do.
Yeah. So I think and that makes some intuitive sense to me to a certain point, right? That there's things that you'll do, and if someone throws a little bit more money at it, you'd be okay. I'll do that a little bit longer. But at some point, you're going to say, I just don't want to do that. And so more money isn't going to really change that. But if you can get the person to want to do that, then that not in a manipulative way, but just, by getting them to see that it is something that's important to them, that has a purpose, that connects into their life and all that, then they're much more likely to engage in it. I think that those are the kinds of things that are important to pay attention to, that when we talk about work and play is often what we're talking about, but we're using these proxy words. But I think the proxy words bring in a certain kind of baggage that we have to be careful about. Right,
and it might be different baggage for everyone.
Sure.
Because, my day job that I have is in chronic disease management, and so I'm constantly talking to patients about, I get sort of care plans from their doctor, and it's my job to call them and say, hey, this is what your doctor wants you to do. What do you think? Let's do this. Let's agree upon a plan. So historically, medicine has, at least primary care, has been sort of warnings of, if you don't do this, you're going to get a heart attack in 10 years, and you're going to suffer consequences, and the sort of finger wagging. Mm-hmm. It's coming around to become more more cultivating of the intrinsic factors, but medicine, and personnel who practice medicine have been so not entrenched, but they've been sort of conditioned to rely upon their training and to rely upon these warnings, and it's tough to get to speak to patients in new terms. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've tried to help get off the ground is, rather than talking to patients about, you got to take your medication, otherwise this will be the consequence, it's maybe start getting them to think about the quality of their life, mm-hmm. as opposed to just the terminality of their life.
Right.
So, from this point forward, how would you like to live your life? Would you like to be robust and full of vitality, or would you like to just get by? Because we can give you either way. We have medicine, or we have diet and exercise, or a combination of the two. You can choose either one, or a combination of the two. But which will give you the most amount of life, quote unquote, vitality, mm-hmm. from now until it's over.
That's good, and it sounds like also in the way that you framed it, at least, that it's something that they're, going back to what I was talking about, they get kind of a buy-in because now they're choosing it. It's not something, well, my doctor told me I have to do this. This is something, I'm choosing to do this because it's going to give me more life. It's going to give me more vitality, more quality. Then I think if that person makes that choice, they're much more likely to follow through with it rather than just have to abide by some
right.
duty that they have to obey their doctor or some external thing pulling on them that they have to do. And you see the same thing with people trying to quit smoking and stuff like that. That if they're just focused on, okay, well, everyone says I have to do it, my doctor says I have to do it, blah blah blah. That never works, right? It's when the smoker decides to be a non-smoker and makes that choice themselves.
Right.
In my experience with friends of mine who have quit, luckily I've never gone down that road. That's when they are able to quit, is when they conceptualize themselves as making that choice
right.
for their own lives, and because I will now be a non-smoker, they make that identity shift. I think they get more buy-in to their activity, even though, not to say that it's easy at that point, but I think because it's their own choice, it is easier, or it's easier. It's harder to say no, maybe is a way to think about
right,
it.
And there are subjective rewards that you simply cannot convey unless you've experienced them. Like I used to personal train through undergrad, and followed with some of my old clients and friends and family who have had sort of a aha moment or body transformation. They've lost ample amount of weight, and what I tell them is that feeling that now, is there any way, in any amount of words, that I could have explained it to you and described it to you properly? And they say no. I say, if I could have, don't you think you would have made the decision to get healthy and live practice healthy behaviors sooner? Yeah. So I think the golden ticket, if it's ever attainable, and I think this is what we do in philosophizing about work and play and trying to communicate it to people, is if we can bottle that up somehow and deliver it, that subjective experience, then we've won, and it'll be easy from there as far as bringing about change and national or obesity problem and everything. It could be translated to anything.
Cool. All right. Well, we've run out of time. So that's like you said, it goes by really quickly when you're having fun, right? So
it does.
Thanks for coming on the show, and I hope to be in touch with you again soon.
Great, Shawn. Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a blast.
This has been the Sports Ethicist Show. You can find us at sportsethicist.com, Facebook, and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.